אני מקשר עצמי לכל צדקים מתים פרדים מתים שוכנע פרק רשימת צמא ופרק מקדוש צדיק יסוד עולם נחל עובד חכמה רבי נחמן בן פגז ודרג ברסלוב אמן. All right, everybody, like we usually do to start every single class, we're going to do the class in honor of the refuah shlema of all the people that are sick. So feel free to say some names right now, and we'll do the class in their honor of them getting healed this year, Bezrat Hashem, as soon as possible.
Rabbi David Ben Esther Bert.
Rabbi David Ben Esther Bert.
Ouais.
סליחה? רבקה בת רינה. רינה בת רבקה. היה בנושא.
מלכה בן שושן.
מלכה בן שושן.
מלכה בת בן שושן.
מלכה בת בן שושן.
Avram Ben Julie.
אברהם בן שרה.
Avram Ben Julie.
אברהם בן ג'ולי. שמואל בן שרה. רחל חיה יפה. בת ויקטוריה מרים. לאה בת מרים. רוברט יריב בן ברט.
לא,
יצחק וכל החולים של המשכן אל נא רפא נא להם. That Hashem should give them a speedy recovery. Amen. Next, we're going to do also for the Leilui Nishmat, for the people that had any person that's passed away in the last year or recently, or they would like to do for the Aliyah of their Neshama.
Solika Bat Nuna.
Nuna.
Miriam Bat Yeshua.
Miriam Bat Yeshua. And everyone that's passed away in this past year. May Hashem and the merit of the tzaddikim help elevate their souls. Amen. May the Torah tonight may be able to help them. Bezrat Hashem, may the Torah that we learn tonight also be able to help us to do tshuva and to be able to get close to Hashem and help bring the Mashiach closer. So tonight we're going to talk about, like we said, I'll talk a little bit louder. If no one could hear me, tell me and I'll speak a little bit louder. I'll try my best, but it's not that easy, but I'll try. So tonight we're going to talk about lesson 6 of Likutei Moharan. This is a class on Saturday nights that we're going to dedicate towards classes on Likutei Moharan, specifically the masterwork of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Lesson 6 talks about a lot of different subjects. It talks about tshuva. It was given right in the time of leading up to, it was given on Shabbat tshuva, but it was specifically given so that people can practice it and read it and learn it during the month of Elul. It talks about a lot of different types of things, from the kavanot of the Arizal in the Tefillah, all the way to the letter Aleph and learning how to be able to help yourself whenever you're going down or whenever you're getting closer to Hashem. So all those different types of concepts are brought up in this lesson. It talks about different types of things like humility, kavod, and of course, since tonight is within the week period of the passing of Rabbi Natan of Breslov, we're going to share some stories of Rabbi Natan of Breslov, which was the main student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, to give some kavod and some hakarat atov to, of course, a very, very special soul. And in reality, we actually don't talk so much about Rabbi Natan, but tonight we're going to see why we actually don't talk so much about other Breslov Hasidim other than Rabbi Nachman. So what I would like to do is I'd like to start off by actually reading the very beginning of lesson 6, and then I'm going to jump into some stories about Rabbi Natan, because this lesson was actually the gift that Rabbi Nachman gave to Rabbi Natan in his first encounter with him. And Bezrat Hashem, as we kind of go through it, we'll be able to go through understanding a little bit of the history and how all this stuff kind of came about. And hopefully with the help of God, we'll be able to actually go a little bit into the lesson. My goal is to not learn the lessons of Likutei Moharan in a rapid way, because there's many ways to sit down and learn Likutei Moharan. This class is going to be done in a way that we can try to focus on little nuances, backgrounds of the stories, why the stories were given, the stories behind who's involved in the story, why Rabbi Nachman's bringing a specific pasuk, and then we'll take time. So one lesson, we're not going to get through a full lesson tonight. We may not get through a lesson in many, many classes, but at the very least, we're going to try to do some of the stuff inside, and at the same time, try to give a little bit of kavod to the class and to the tzaddikim as well. So this lesson specifically, lesson 6, starts off, and many lessons in Likutei Moharan start off when Rabbi Nachman quotes a pasuk. And what he'll do in the very beginning is he'll bring you a specific section of Tanakh or Teilim, and he'll say something, and then he'll go into depth throughout the whole lesson, bringing a lot of other different types of concepts, and then explaining how eventually at the end it all comes back full circle to show you the actual secrets behind the reason why that first pasuk came about. So a lot of the time of Likutei Moharan, when you're learning it for the first time, you may think that it's a very sophisticated book, it's very complicated, and it is in a lot of different types of ways. But know that as you kind of get into it, be patient and read, because eventually it will eventually sink in and it will eventually come together. So a lot of the lessons of Likutei Moharan are like that, and this happens to be a very long one. So we'll just do the very beginning of it. So the lesson of, or essentially lesson 6 starts off where it's quoting a pasuk in Dvarim when Hashem is telling to Moshe to call Yehoshua and bring him to the Ohel Moed. Okay, and it says at the very beginning, he just quotes the very beginning of the pasuk, and then he says Vechule. He says Vayomer Hashem el Moshe Kal Yehoshua, right? And then he's eventually going to say bring him to the Ohel Moed. And Rabbi Nachman is going to explain, and he's going to give a class based on this. And then the first words brought down in the lesson is the first pasuk, essentially, or the first phrase, the sentence in the class says Ki tzarich kol adam lemaet bichvod atzmo ulearbot bichvod hamakom. And a person needs to, or every single person needs to reduce their own honor and increase the honor of Hashem. Makom is a reference to Hashem. So immediately you see that the lesson starts off with a pasuk about Hashem calling Moshe and telling him, go call Yehoshua. And then Rabbi Nachman starts off the lesson by saying that a person needs to humble themselves so that they can be able to bring out the glory of Hashem. Completely unrelated, seemingly. We're going to go into this in just a little bit. So I just wanted to show you the words, and we're going to come back to it in just a little bit. Are they looking for a place to sit or sit down? Okay.
You see someone that we don't see.
No. There were some people that walked in, but
okay.
it's fine. All right. So lesson 6 was actually given. This specific lesson was given in the year 1802, like we said, around Shabbat Shuvah, and this lesson was given to Rabbi Natan when Rabbi Natan came to Rabbi Nachman, not for the first time, but in the very beginning of his journeying to Rabbi Nachman. And I would like to start off by setting the groundwork over here with saying a little bit of stories to show you essentially how we got to where we got to in this lesson, and essentially who Rabbi Natan was, that Rabbi Nachman decided to accept him as his main student. So Rabbi Natan, and I'm going to try to avoid some stories that my brother shared on Thursday night, because my brother also does a class on Rabbi Nachman, and he shared also some stories about Rabbi Natan for the Hiloula of Rebbe this past Thursday, so I'll try to share some different stories from what I heard from his class, so that people could understand. But just so that we understand a little bit of the background, Rabbi Natan grew up in an environment that is completely opposite of what Breslov Chassidut was. Just as a little bit of general history, once the Baal Shem Tov came into the picture, about a few hundred years ago, the Baal Shem Tov started revealing massive teachings of Kabbalah, bringing other people back in Shuvah, and bringing other people in terms of his followers and other people back to Hashem. But because of the revelation of the teachings and the depth of the teachings that he was doing, it caused a lot of outrage to a lot of mitnagdim, as they are called, people that were essentially opposers, or people that were against the Chassidut and the revelation of not sitting down and studying Torah according to the way people traditionally did it. And so what this did is it caused a rift of people not being able to sit down and study the different types of Chassidut and the Kabbalah. And within Eastern Europe, which was a center of massive Torah teaching within the world, you had Gdolim that were just sitting down in terms of Halacha, Gemara, and you had Gdolim in terms of the Kabbalah and Chassidut that were in Eastern Europe at the time. So when you had this combination of people growing up in these different environments, most people didn't actually go to both sides. They usually just stayed within their camps. And they were brought up learning that one was right or one was wrong, and they kind of always had this opposition. Now Rabbi Natan grew up specifically in the Mitnagdim camp, which means that he never really had an enlightenment or an opportunity to be able to see the Torah through the lens of Chassidut, the Baal Shem Tov, in the way that we kind of learn Torah today. We share stories of tzaddikim, we share teachings of the Zohar, we're learning Likutei Moharan. Many people today that would be Mitnagdim would not even listen to a single word that's being shared tonight. They would not even consider it proper Torah at all. And so you have to understand that back then it was even stronger opposition, to the point that they were putting Jews in jail, that they didn't agree with their Torah teachings. They would persecute them, they would try to kill them. Literally, religious Jews were trying to kill other religious Jews because they didn't accept the Torah that they were teaching. And this mostly came from the aspect of the mitnagdim. And the Breslov people took most of the brunt of that. So Rabbi Natan, when he grew up, he was incredibly bright. He was a very, very special soul. Rabbi Nachman said that Rabbi Natan had a soul that never came into the world before. The Arizal says that people come back in Gilgulim by the Arizal's generation, which was about 400 or 500 years ago, already 2-3 times by the time they already came to the generation of the Arizal. But he said that Rabbi Natan's neshama never came into the world at all. It was completely new. It was completely novel. So much so that so many big mekubalim and big tzaddikim that eventually met Rabbi Natan before he got close to Rabbi Nachman, said that he was an incredible soul and they loved him from the depths of their heart because they saw that he was such a special person. And he was, even though he was not opposed to the Chassidut yet or anything like that, Chaz v'shalom, he had so much love for the Torah and so much love for tzaddikim that people saw all the kindness and all the beauty within his neshama. So Rabbi Natan was such a special and holy person that he grew up into the house of Rav David Tzvi. Rav David Tzvi was considered the gadol of the time for the mitnagdim. He was essentially so big that Rabbi Natan ended up marrying his daughter. Rabbi Natan at the time got married around the age of 13, and he was such a big tzaddik that under the age of 20 he was already Av Beit Din. So he was already the head of the Beit Din. And Rabbi Natan was supposed to be the successor of Rav David Tzvi, who was this big Rav that was a Rav over 70 different cities at the time. So this isn't 70 different cities that we would think of today. These are 70 cities of the biggest tzaddikim that existed at the time that people only learned under these people. It's like the equivalent today of a person being Rav of 70 cities in Yerushalayim. Already we have Rabbanim of each of those individual cities that are great. He said that he didn't know the difference between Rav David Tzvi and Moshe Rabbeinu, Rabbi Natan said when he was younger. He said Rav David Tzvi looked so much like a tzaddik, he said, I don't understand what the difference would be between Moshe Rabbeinu and my father-in-law. That's how big of a tzaddik Rav David Tzvi was. So even though we're talking about mitnagdim and people that were against the Baal Shem Tov and the Chassidut and the Kabbalah, these are people that were incredibly righteous who wouldn't even be able to even hold a match to essentially how great these people were. So while we sit here and we talk about mitnagdim and we say that Baruch Hashem we have the opportunity to study very holy books, we have to recognize and humble ourselves to the fact that, if we grew up in this time and we were in this environment, we would never see greatness like this. If Rav David Tzvi was alive today, people would be literally going to visit him. They would think that he was the Mashiach. That's how big of a tzaddik this person was. It's literally that shaking. And so Rav Natan was under him, and eventually he realized that there was still something missing when he was with Rav David Tzvi, and he had opportunity to go visit other tzaddikim. He visited Rav Zusha. He eventually visited Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev. And a very quick story just on Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, so I can kind of get into the backstory of Rabbi Nachman. Is when he eventually spent some time with Rav Levi Yitzchak, Rabbi Natan wrote the commentary to Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's work on his Perush on the Torah. So that's how much Rabbi Levi Yitzchak loved Rabbi Natan and appreciated his chokhmah. So it was not just that Rabbi Natan was considered a chacham, he knew obviously all of Shas before the age of 16, he was an incredibly wise person. He eventually met Rabbi Nachman at the age of 22 and was accepted as his student at the age of 22. So if you can imagine, to be accepted as the head of which we know Rabbi Nachman being an incredible tzaddik, to accept his student at the age of 22 when he had people that were 70 years old and heads of cities that took off their shtreimel and said, I want to be the student of Rabbi Nachman and learned at Rabbi Nachman's feet. He said, I want him. And he was 22 and he didn't even learn under him. He was waiting for him to show up. We're going to see why Rabbi Natan was so special. So these are only kind of like little introductions. When Rabbi Natan was at Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's house one Shabbat, after Shabbat, Motzei Shabbat, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak and all the students, they had chosen him to be able to go out and go get some bagels, to be able to do Melave Malka, kind of like we're doing right now, learning Torah on Saturday nights. And as he was going out to get the bagels, he eventually found his way, kind of laughing and smiling. He said, Hashem, I'm trying to do tshuva, and you're sending me with bagels. And he starts laughing and dancing, and he does his way, and he finds his way into a Beit Midrash. And because the Beit Midrash was packed on the men's side, he eventually goes to the women's side, which was completely empty, and he starts crying and reading Tehillim. He falls asleep, and when he falls asleep, he has a vision. He has a vision of him climbing a ladder, and he goes up, and then he comes down, and then he falls, then he comes up, and then he comes down again, and then he does the same thing over and over again until a head comes out, a face pops up at the top of the ladder, and tells him, keep climbing and hold on strong. And he doesn't know who it is, and he wakes up, and then he goes back. Eventually, after many Shabbatot of spending time with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, he had a friend of his that he saw at Rabbi Levi Yitzchak who was known for praying in a very sturdy manner, a very simple manner that was very rigid in terms of the halacha and not making an extra movement if it wasn't necessary. Many people are very careful to not do extra movements in the tefillah if they don't need to. And he saw that this person changed his way of doing tefillah completely. So he told him, what happened? How did you get all these extra kavanot? Where did you get to this level of learning how to pray like this? And he told him, there's a new Rav in town, and I want to take you to see him. And his name is Rabbi Nachman. And eventually, this was the introduction of how Rabbi Natan was eventually brought to Rabbi Nachman. And that's how we're going to get into the beginning of this lesson in just a second. One last story I'd like to share before I kind of jump into this, and then we'll share a couple more stories later, is that there's a very famous story of Rabbi Yisrael Dovodeser. Rabbi Yisrael Dovodeser was known as Saba. He was a very, very, very huge tzaddik. Very few people could even understand the level of this tzaddik. He passed away in 1994, so he passed away in the last generation. He was an avid Breslov follower and obviously a massive student of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Everything he did was to be able to help bring people closer to Rabbi Nachman of Breslov and bring people back in Shuvah, and to show people that everything that comes down, everything that we need to do in this world is to be able to get close to Hashem. That's all he showed. Everything of his being was to be able to do that. And so Rabbi Yisrael Dovodeser, he had many times lots of people randomly approached him, and one time one of the Chaborim, one of the students that was in the area, came and told him, I want you to tell me about who Rabbi Natan was. He also asked him separately, there were people that asked him about Rabbi Nachman. Just as a general point, when people came and asked Rabbi Yisrael, they said, tell me about Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. He said, Rabbi Nachman Zesod. No one understands what Rabbi Nachman is. He said, Rabbi Nachman's a secret. No one will ever know what Rabbi Nachman is. And this was probably the gadol of the generation. This was a person that was the biggest tzaddik that people had witnessed with their own eyes. This was a person that if they saw him, they said that they saw an angel of God in front of them. That the Shekhinah of Hashem Mamash dwelled right in front of this person. There's, countless stories that I could share. We could probably go till 6 a.m. just sharing like 50, 60, 70, 100 stories of this tzaddik and miracles. But it wouldn't still do justice of what the type of tzaddik this person was. But he said, for Rabbi Natan, I'll tell you who Rabbi Natan is. He said, Rabbi Natan, and this is remarkable, he said, Rabbi Natan is the etrog of Hashem. The etrog of Hashem. So he said, I'll explain. When Sukkot comes around, there's a lot of different types of meditations and Kabbalah behind the different types of the meanings of the minim that we use and what they signify and all the different types of importance behind them. But the etrog is very special. The etrog is very special because obviously Hasidim and Rabbanim in Israel, they go look months before Sukkot comes around. They start looking for the best etrog. They go to the people that source them, the farms, the trees, everything. They start communicating with people to get the best ones. And then when it comes to the market, everybody goes searching and every person looks for the best one that they could find. They're willing to pay the best dollar. There's stories of Hasidim that used to pay and they used to wait years and years and years just to be able to afford just one etrog, of one that they can do the mitzvah properly. People are so specific with the etrog that they choose if it has the pitom, the shape, the color, the way it is, the blemishes, it can't even have one stain on it. People are so serious when it comes to the etrog. And so he says that, I'm going to explain to you why Rabbi Natan is the etrog of Hashem. When people go look for etrogim, they get to a place where you have all these people that go to the market and they look for the best one in the market. He said, but before the people that go to the market, there's the big tzaddikim and their students that they go to the people secretly before, and they go pick up the best ones before they even hit the market. And he says they bring those to their rabbanim. And he says there's people that go even before those people for the Gdolei Ador. When you're looking at people like Rav Ovadia Yosef or things like that, then they go even earlier and they go and they have their shamashim and they have people that go for them in advance and they pay insane amounts of money just to go pick the best of the best of the best of the best etrog that they can find, not with one stain at all. And those are the ones that go to those types of people. He says Rabbi Natan is the etrog of Hashem because Rabbi Natan is the most perfect etrog. Is the perfect etrog because Rabbi Nachman gave the etrog as a gift to Hashem. He says why? Because whenever Rabbi Nachman hands the etrog to Hashem, he says that the angels, they come and they inspect, just like all the Hasidim and all the Shamashim of all the big tzaddikim. They come and they look at it and they say, what's wrong with it? And they say, since Hashem takes the etrog of Rabbi Natan, there's not a single blemish on it. But then how can you say that Rabbi Natan never had a single thing wrong with him? He said, because Rabbi Natan never found a single thing wrong with any Jew that ever existed throughout his whole life. He never saw a single thing wrong with him. So to him, there's not a single thing that's ever wrong with him. And that's why he's the etrog of Hashem. We're going to see tonight, aside from the fact that we can talk about Rabbi Natan, The biggest kavod that we can give to Rabbi Natan is to talk about Rabbi Nachman. And we're going to see why. But Rabbi Natan was such a special Jew to realize that no matter what his level was, we can talk tonight and we can share lots of stories about how he was Av Bedin, that he was supposed to inherit being the Rav of 70 different cities. He could have been the Rav of every single town. But there's something very, very unique that exists within Breslov Chassidut that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. And we were talking about it a little bit today at lunch over Shabbat, and we were talking about it before many times. And that is the concept that in Breslov Chassidut, and many Rabbanim recognize this, even Rabbanim that are not even Breslov recognize this. They said never existed in the world a Rav that decided to not accept to become the next Rav after the Rav passed away. It never existed. Whenever Rabbanim today are passing away, the next ones are jumping like, if you can imagine anything in the world to become the next Rav, the next Gadol Ador, the next one that's supposed to be the leader of Am Yisrael. Rabbi Nachman already, for those that know, was already one of the greatest of all time. For those that are involved in it, for me, he was the greatest. But to be able to come after him and say that he was the student, and to say that he was supposed to take on the mantle of being the next Rav, and said, no, I'm not going to be the next Rav. He is still the Rav. The Zohar talks about in the Parshot when Moshe Rabbeinu passes away, it says Moshe Rabbeinu lo met. Right? Da Moshe lo met. Know that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't pass away. There's a lot of different secrets behind this, and there's a lot of different explanations behind this. The simple explanation behind the Zohar is to explain that the tzaddik never dies. He's more alive after he passes away than whenever he's alive in this world, because he can do more because he's not limited by his physical body. And we've talked about it before in multiple classes. But Rabbi Natan said, if I become the Rav, then that means the Rav didn't finish his job, and we have to continue his work. The Rav did everything that he needed to do. There's nothing else that I need to add. All that we can do is continue to attach ourselves to the Rav, the tzaddik I met, the tzaddik that is Moshe that keeps coming back to help bring about the Mashiach. And to continue to study and to continue to attach ourselves to him and to continue to get close to him. We're going to see all the devotion of Rabbi Natan, how it was dedicated this way. There's a midrash that's brought down in Bereshit that when Hashem created the world, in the very beginning when Adam sinned, it said that immediately when Adam ate from the tree, it said Hashem looked to the side. He looked to check for something. Rav Avram ben Nachman was a massive tzaddik. Rav Avram ben Nachman, his ancestor, I think it was his grandfather that was close to Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman got his grandfather close to him to say just that if you know who's going to come from you, it's worth it for all of this. Rabbi Nachman just got close to his grandfather just because to bring him close to him so that one of his future generations that was going to come from him was going to be able to interpret and write teachings of the lessons of Likutei Moharan and obviously of the concepts that were taught in Breslov Chassidut. And Rav Avram ben Nachman wrote incredible things. We're going to talk a little bit about him tonight for a quick second, but he said that when Hashem looked over to the side, when he's referencing different concepts in the Zohar and the Midrashim, he says that when something goes wrong, when you hear an explosion or whenever you hear an earthquake, immediately a parent's first instinct is, let me protect the things that are most important to me. So when Hashem saw that Adam ate from the tree and destruction came into the world immediately, he looked to see what? The Rav and the Talmid. And he looked at who? At Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Natan. And he said, because from here I see that they will exist in the future and they will be able to repair, this is going to be okay. And he saw that everything was okay. So he didn't need to intervene. In the very beginning of this lesson, we said that Rabbi Natan traveled and had a lot of Mesiyahut Nefesh to be able to come to Rabbi Nachman. Like we said, he came from the side of the Mitnagdim. So if you can imagine Rabbi Natan, imagine his place being one of the head Rabbanim. People are waiting for him to become the next Rav. He's a person that's incredibly learned, and he's leaving weekends on weekends and meeting new Chachamim. He's meeting new tzaddikim, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. He's meeting all these big tzaddikim, and eventually he meets Rabbi Nachman. He comes to Rabbi Nachman at the age of 22, and Rabbi Nachman knows that Rabbi Natan is going to be a student that he's been waiting for this whole time. He knew it already because he went to him in the dream when he was with Rabbi Levi Yitzchak a year before, and he went and saw him then. So he already knew where he was, but he's been waiting for him to show up. Rabbi Nachman told him, we've been waiting for this for thousands of years. And Rabbi Natan didn't know, but when Rabbi Natan saw the face of Rabbi Nachman, he realized that it was the man that was on top of the ladder. So whenever he finally comes to Rabbi Nachman, he doesn't know yet that he's about to be the student, but Rabbi Nachman is about to embark on a massive journey and explain to him why he's giving him lesson 6. So he reveals to him eventually that he comes to him for Rosh Hashanah, and he leaves his family behind, and he leaves everyone behind back home, and he goes with Rabbi Nachman. He doesn't tell people that he's going to Rabbi Nachman because Rabbi Nachman has a tremendous amount of controversy. He travels back home. He goes back for Yom Kippur, for Shabbat Shuvah. Everyone's starting to get concerned. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Everyone's starting to lose it. And Rabbi Nachman says, because of your Mesirut Nefesh, and because you've become and you've started to get close and attached to me, even though I saw this coming, now I will start to show you that you are going to be my student. And in the lesson, and whenever he did that, in the very beginning of this lesson, we say that there's the pasuk quoted from Devarim, which is Vayomer Hashem Moshe Kal Yehoshua. There's something that's unfortunately a little bit sad in the Torah, which we don't recognize, which is that when Moshe Rabbeinu, at the end of his life, in the last 5 days of his life to be exact, Hashem called him, and obviously Hashem spoke to Moshe consistently, all the time. It never ended. But when he called Yehoshua, it was the time to bring on the concept of the student. It never existed before then. So Hashem says to Moshe, call Yehoshua, we're going to go to the tent of meeting, because actually whenever Hashem spoke to other people other than Moshe, he only could speak to them in the tent of meeting. He could only speak to them in the concepts of the Kodesh HaKodashim, especially in the holiest of the holies. Even though it wasn't the Kodesh HaKodashim yet, it's the concept of in the Ol Moed, in the presence wherever there's only this very holy Shekhinah that exists there. But the sad part about it is that we don't realize this, but Yehoshua and Moshe had a relationship of Talmid and Rav officially only for the last 5 days of his life. And Hashem loved Moshe Rabbeinu so much that it says in the commentaries over there that when he spoke to Moshe and to Yehoshua in the tent, when they eventually went into the tent, and Moshe was going to pass on and say to Yehoshua, you're going to become the next person after me to lead Bnei Israel. It says that Hashem was speaking in the tent to Moshe and telling Moshe, talk to Yehoshua. But in reality, Yehoshua was hearing Hashem speak to Moshe. But Hashem spoke to Moshe and told him speak to Yehoshua because he never wanted to, while Moshe was alive, to make Moshe feel bad that he was speaking directly to Yehoshua and he forgot him. So out of the anava and nemat of love that Hashem had for Moshe Rabbeinu, it says, he spoke while Moshe was alive to Moshe and then said, speak to Yehoshua, even though Yehoshua heard him say, speak to Moshe, speak to Yehoshua. So you have this concept that at the time, we never had the opportunity for people to learn the concept of Rav and Talmid. It's a concept that kept on trying to repair itself and come back, but it was never perfected. It was never perfected to the point that when Rabbi Nachman sees Rabbi Natan now, and he sees him walk in, if you can imagine, Rabbi Nachman said, now it's been thousands of years that we've been waiting for this. Why? Because he said, in this moment, we are becoming Gilgulim, because I'm taking on a piece of the Neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu, and you're taking on a piece of the Neshama of Yehoshua. Because them, they only met at the end of their lives, for the last 5 days. But we're going to spend the rest of our lives together. And they're going to spend the next 8 years of their life together. Because Rabbi Nachman was 30 at the time, Rabbi Natan was 22, and Rabbi Nachman passed away at the age of 38, and Rabbi Natan would be 30 at that point. For the next 8 years, Rabbi Natan would never leave Rabbi Nachman's side. Everything he did, he dedicated to becoming close to him. There's something very important to realize, that what made Yehoshua be chosen, and why did he pick this lesson to show Rabbi Natan? Why was Yehoshua chosen to become the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu? There were people that were greater than Yehoshua, according to the Kabbalah. If you look at the Midrashim, there was Betzalel, that was the one that had the ability to erect the Mishkan. He knew all the sodot of how to put it all together. There were people that, you had Caleb ben Yefuneh, you had all the heads of the tribes that were incredibly great. You had Yehoshua, so why Yehoshua get picked? The reason why Yehoshua got picked, according to Rabbi Nachman, is because Yehoshua never left Moshe Rabbeinu's side. He said, no matter what, it's not I'm going to sit down and study other things and do other things and do whatever I need to do and study the Gemara and study this and study that. No. Whatever my Rav says, I do. I don't leave him no matter what. Everything he says, I'm going to do exactly what he says. I'm going to do everything. I'm never going to leave him for even 1 second. He completely nullified himself. Rabbi Natan could have been, we never speak of Rabbi Natan. Even Breslov Chassidim don't even talk about Rabbi Natan. People that are not even in Breslov Chassidim don't even know really so much about Rabbi Natan. They only know that he's the main student of Rabbi Nachman. After that, they don't even know much more than that. Rabbi Natan, if he wasn't with Rabbi Nachman, we would be speaking of Rabbi Natan as if he was the Gadol Ador, as the biggest tzaddik that existed in the last 500 years. Rabbi Nachman says that Rabbi Natan was so big that in his Likutei Halachot that he wrote on the commentary on the different on the Shulchan Aruch, he said that Rabbi Natan is so big that he could teach Kabbalah through Likutei Halachot to an 8-year-old. He could explain all of the Kabbalah in the Halakha to an 8-year-old. He said, but he doesn't need to. He doesn't want to. He says, because what's the point of doing it? I just want to bring people close to Hashem. People had no idea the level of Rabbi Natan. And he removed everything from himself like Yeshua did. Yeshua is the type of person that if you show up to a shul and you see a Rav, and you see that person that's always very, very close to the Rav, but he's not anyone that you would consider special, right? He's not the person that sits down and learns all day. He's not the person that does tikkun chatzot. He's not the person that comes and has all these crazy kavanot in the tefillah. He's the person that comes and he's next to the Rav and he brings him his cup of water. He's the person that comes next to the Rav and he cleans up the shul after him. He goes and sees him in the morning. How are you doing? He talks with him. He laughs with him. He jokes with him. That was Rabbi Natan. Rabbi Natan never left Rabbi Nachman. And in Breslov Hasidut, there were people, which I don't even know if we can even say this, but there are people that even say it because it was brought even down between Rav Avraham ben Nachman. They said there are people that even in terms of Chokhmah, that were greater than Rabbi Natan. Like we said, there were people that were 70 years old that were Rabbanim of towns that they even removed their shrimo as well within the Hasidut. And there were people that were so great that even Rabbi Nachman said that he would pray to have the right words to say in front of these types of tzaddikim, that they themselves wanted to become students of Rabbi Nachman, and Rabbi Nachman still took Rabbi Natan. It's because he was able to make himself enough. And we're going to get into it in a little bit in this lesson.
How many students did he have when he was alive?
Rabbi Nachman?
Yeah.
He had a lot of different types of students, but the main thing that happened, we're talking about, how many?
I think 60.
60 main students, but there was hundreds and hundreds of students that eventually branched out from that because people realized that they couldn't even get close to Rabbi Nachman. In fact, there was very few people that even got into the close quarters of Rabbi Nachman. It was everybody after that started to get close to Rabbi Natan because they said, what did the Rav say? What did the Rav do this? What did he explain in this lesson? What did you do with him in the room? And then they started absorbing from Rabbi Natan because Rabbi Nachman would seclude himself. He was so detached from this world, like we said from Rabbi Israel, Rabbi Nachman Zesod. No one will understand Rabbi Nachman. So you had obviously Rabbi Naftali, you had Rabbi Aaron, you had lots and lots of big tzaddikim, Rabbi Shmuel Isaac, you had insane tzaddikim that existed at the time. And all of them, we don't even really share stories of them because they all made themselves zero in front of Rabbi Nachman. But no one made themselves zero like Rabbi Natan. In lesson 6, also, aside from the things that we talked about that this lesson actually has, is, funny enough, this lesson also has the secret of the Merkabah in it. The secret of the teachings of the Kabbalah of the Merkabah. Now, the teachings of the Merkabah, we know from the time of the Gemara, was only taught from student to student. It was only taught from one person to another person. No one else knew it. It's essentially incredibly deep teachings that we learn from the prophecies of Ezekiel. And they're so elevated that very few people, no one in the recent generations discussed of how to essentially perform it or do it. If anyone did it, it was hidden, and it was only by person, by generation. Rabbi Nachman in this lesson reveals the secrets of obviously the Merkabah. We don't know it because it's hidden, but Rabbi Natan explains when explaining the lesson. He said when Rabbi Nachman got to the point of explaining the Merkabah in this lesson, which we may get to, not tonight, but as we develop lesson 6, Rabbi Nachman was sitting in a chair, and he was explaining the prophecy. And when Ezekiel, we're not going to go through the whole prophecy of Yechezkel and what happens, but whenever he's essentially by a riverbank and he sees his reflection, and then eventually he's seeing through the water, he's starting to see a vision, and through the vision, Rabbi Nachman says, I am the river that essentially purifies and comes from the source, right? The words in Hebrew is Ani Hanahar HaMetaher Mikol HaKetamim. And whenever he revealed the lesson, he started getting to the point where he was sitting in his famous chair, Rabbi Nachman, and he started to shake. And as he was shaking when he was revealing the lesson, he says, and there's a man that sits and, what does he say? And he says that there was on a man, he says that there was a chair, and on the chair sits the man, and he can be called a man essentially. And at that point, no one understood anything of what it meant when it happened. But at the moment that it happened and he was revealing the lesson, he started shaking and he started going into such an insane trance that everybody in the room started freaking out. They didn't know what was going on. And in the moment, Rabbi Nachman started doing the Merkabah ascent and being able to essentially do all the teachings that he was explaining in the lesson to the point that he was doing Aliyat Neshama in the midst of everyone else that was in the room when this was being revealed in lesson 6. So it's not just that we're getting around to a lesson that is just something very simple, but of course it's something that has a tremendous amount of Kabbalah behind that. Like we said, it has the kavanot of the Arizal in the lesson that many people didn't even understand when they read the lesson by themselves. So when people came to Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Nachman after, they said, I'll show you them if you want, and they brought him a Sidur of the Arizal, and they showed him that in the actual lesson are the secrets of the kavanot of the Arizal. Of course, they're not revealed simply, but people have to understand that within each little lesson and every single thing, there's a tremendous amount of backstory. So, to jump into the lesson, because the Mesirut Nefesh of Rabbi Natan, he revealed to him this. And he said, Ki tzarich kol adam lemad bichod atzmo ulearbot bichod hamakom. And you should reduce your own kavod to make yourself zero, like Rabbi Natan essentially did, and that's why I gave a little backstory to that. And then, when you make yourself nothing, you essentially increase the kavod of Hashem, which is allowing for Hashem to be able to come to exist in the world through you. And then it's really about bringing the best glory of Hashem into the world. The interesting thing that's brought up with this lesson, and this is where we're going to kind of stay and dwell within this point for a second, is that if you look at the beginning of the lesson, it says, Ki tzarich kol adam. It's essentially starting the lesson by answering something, but there's no question. So what does it mean that you start off the lesson by saying that a person needs to start to lower his own kavod, and to be able to bring out the kavod of Hashem, the kavod of Makom? But how do you even do that? What's the point of that? Like how do you even get me to that point? So why is the lesson even starting off with a question? It's missing something before that. So in order to understand this, the book of Likutei Moharan is taught on many different types of levels. So there's Rav Avram ben Nachman, who writes in Biur HaLikutim, which is Perush on Likutei Moharan, and some of the commentaries that he brings. He says that there's 18 different lessons and 18 different ways and rules of how to study Likutei Moharan. And everybody has different ways of learning Likutei Moharan. These are people that are very, very special, and they study it obviously in incredible depth. But there's also other people that understood Likutei Moharan in a very different way. Rabbi Yisrael Dov Odesser, who we talked about a little bit earlier tonight, said that you can learn Likutei Moharan as if Likutei Moharan was one whole lesson. Even though the book obviously has more than 400 lessons in it, he says all of it is one lesson. He says, but you have to know how to put it in order. He says it's not in order. So tonight we're going to follow a little bit, just to show you a little hint into the idea of what Rabbi Yisrael Dov Odesser meant by this. That to understand Likutei Moharan, you have to understand it as one whole picture, not just one little lesson or one sentence. Because a lesson is starting off with something that's answering something else, but it's picking up from somewhere else. So in reality, we have to find out where it's picking up from. And Likutei Moharan is obviously, like we said, it's made up of 2 different books. And it's over 400 lessons. So if you go to lesson 88 of book 2, which I have over here, I'm not going to read you the whole lesson. Rabbi Nachman talks about something very bizarre. And he says in the lesson that people need to be very careful of eating fruit from a tree. He never says anything like this in any other place. But it's very, very unique and it's very mystical. Even Rabbi Natan says at the end of the lesson, a lot of this stuff no one understands. I don't understand. I don't know how anyone understands this at all. He said, but people need to be careful when they eat from a tree, a fruit from a tree, if they take it before it's ripe. Why? Because it gains its life from the tree, and when you take the fruit from the tree early, you can chas v'shalom lose your life early. It's a sod, it's a secret. It's very, very unique. He says the reason why, the very simple reason why is because when an apple, for example, is gaining its sustenance and it's taking its life force from the tree, and you take the apple and you start eating into the apple, since it still needs life force, it starts to take from within you, and it starts to take away from your own life. Bizarrely enough, we're not going to get into the sodot and the explanations of this right now because it's something else. It's just, we need to understand this to understand lesson 6. Just a little bit of this. Then he says in the same lesson that there's this special angel. Very bizarrely, just jumps immediately to there's an angel. And that angel has angels under him. And those angels, they blow tekiah, trua, tekiah. Or trua, tekiah, tekiah. I can actually tell it to you specifically what it is. Yeah, tekiah, trua, tekiah. And then they start to dig. The angels start to dig. They start to dig for things that they lost. Or things that are lost items. That's it. That's the lesson. It's insane because there's lots of lessons that are like that in Likutei Moharan and people don't understand a single thing. But this is why we have to spend a little bit of time to dig a little bit deep into them. So Rav Avram ben Nachman, like we said, was the son of Rabbi Nachman of Tulchin, who was one of the big Gdolim that existed at the time. He was the main attached best friend, student of, not best friend because Rabbi Naftali was the best friend of Rabbi Natan, but he was the main student of Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Nachman of Tulchin. And Rabbi Nachman of Tulchin had Rabbi Avram ben Nachman. Rabbi Avram ben Nachman is the one that I told you wrote the 18 laws of how to study Likutei Moharan. He was an incredible soul. He was also so wise that he knew all of the Shulchan Aruch. Also, by the age of 16, he knew all of Kabbalah. He was the person that I told you that he was so great that his grandfather, Rabbi Nachman, brought him close to him because he knew that from him was going to come Avram ben Nachman. So, they call him also Rav Avram Chazan. And Rav Avram ben Nachman says these two concepts are brought in the same lesson right next to each other because they're juxtaposed. And he says, to understand it, he says you have to know that when a person eats from the tree prematurely, and they start to lose their lives and people die this way, chas v'shalom, he says the angels that they're finding the lost items, they're finding the lost souls of those people that ate from the tree early. That's why he puts them together. Does that make sense?
No, can you repeat the last sentence?
I'm going to repeat it. So Rav Avram ben Nachman says the reason why Rabbi Nachman explains both the concepts together is because he's trying to show you that if you eat from the tree and God forbid the person passes away and he has these lost items because the person passes away, the angels that are blowing the shofar, they're digging and they're digging for lost souls and lost items. They're digging for the souls of the people that passed away early from the tree. But there's a concept of these angels also digging for things that people lost. Lost items, lost goods, lost things. And Rav Avram ben Nachman and Rabbi Natan and other people talk about the fact that these are the things that we lose. They're things that when we do bad things, chas v'shalom, hashavat aveda, it's almost like returning a lost object, but we lose opportunities to do mitzvot. When we speak badly, we have all these losses that occur to us. And so the reason why he brings all this stuff up is because he specifically wants to show us that we have a tremendous amount of losses that we don't know how to regain. Separately from this, he says to understand also lesson 6, you have to understand another lesson as well in the cumulative of Likutei Moharan. He says if you go to, we just did 188 of book, we just did lesson 88 of book 2, but if you go to lesson 188 of book 1 of Likutei Moharan, you'll learn in that lesson, and that's the one that I had pulled up originally over here, which is that a person needs to travel to the tzaddik. It talks about traveling to the tzaddik. There's concepts over there about traveling to the tzaddik on Rosh Hashanah. But a person needs to travel to the tzaddik for the things that he's lost. And so the reason why a person needs to travel to the tzaddik for the things that he's lost, we learn from Rav Avram ben Nachman in the connection of the previous lessons, is that when a person does something wrong in this world, is eventually they start to do things that they create these different types of items that they lose from within themselves. Every single time you speak badly, every time you do a sin, you create a loss. And those losses, eventually, according to the Kabbalah, we need to be able to bring back to ourselves. We need to regain all those losses. So Rabbi Nachman in lesson 188 of book 1, he says that a person needs to travel to the tzaddik to regain his losses. And when a person regains his losses and he travels to the tzaddik, he's able to get back everything that he lost. But there's a very big question, right? Because when a person sins and a person does something wrong, it's not really them that's doing it. But we're overwhelmed by the sin and we're overwhelmed by the loss. Because in reality, when a person sins, it's a ruach shtut that essentially enters into the body. It's a spirit of folly that confuses the person. And that's why when a person does something wrong, they feel like they're not themselves. So we learn from over here that it's very important that people understand something, that when a person's doing something that it's an outside energy that's essentially enabling a person to be able to do something wrong. And a person needs to be cognizant of the fact that some of that energy is coming from something that's outside of them. The Zohar also refers to a concept of regaining losses as well, which is why it's also really well interconnected within this lesson. We shared last class, whenever we gave the class, about how Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai are very well connected because they obviously share the same neshama. It's in the introduction of Likutei Moharan, but we're not going to dwell on that. But the main point of the reason why I bring this up is because when a person, since they're born, the Zohar talks about this, is that when before a person is born, a person learns with an angel in the womb, in the stomach of their mother. And eventually, before they're born, it says that the angel touches the person right above the lip, under the nose, and that's what creates the mark. And the person forgets all the Torah that the angel taught him, their mission in this world, everything that they need to do. And the Zohar talks about it. And the Zohar says...
Why do Goyim also have it?
What?
Why do Goyim also have it?
Because the Goyim also have things that they have to do in this world. Goyim also have nefashot, but they don't have the upper levels of the nefashot. They only have the nefesh. They only have the lowest level of the neshama. Everybody needs a nefesh to exist, because you cannot exist mystically and spiritually without the lowest level of the nefesh. The nefesh essentially exists within your blood. It's what gives the form to the body. And whenever a person is born, the Zohar says, and the Mifashim also say, a lot of people bring this up, they say that the reason why a person forgets is not just because the angel touches them, it's because the second the person comes into this world, the air of impurity that exists in this low plane in this world is so bad that it hits the baby so strongly and he forgets instantaneously all the Torah and all his mission and everything he needs to do that exists. So, Chavavan Ben Nachman, Rabbi Natan, all the Breslovers have a question on these lessons. They say, we lose all these losses throughout our life. We have averot that we do. We have all these things that we don't know how to properly do. We don't know how to properly pray. We don't know how to properly do what we need to do in this world. It says we also have our mission that we don't even know if we're doing it right. And we lost that too because whenever we're born, we forget all of that too. So how do we regain all of this? And eventually we have to get to the point that's brought up in the lesson that Rabbi Nachman says that at the end of your life, you can come to the tzaddik, and he's referring to himself, and you can come to the tzaddik, and at the end of your life you can say, I needed this, 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 and this, and you know exactly what you need to accomplish in your life. When you attach yourself to the tzaddik, by the end of your life, you know exactly what you regained and whatever you needed. There's also a sod, just as a little tangent and a little parenthesis. In the paragraph in the Amidah, when we talk about the tzaddikim, right, which is one of the paragraphs that we read before Modim, there's a machshava that a person needs to have, there's a kavanah that a person needs to have that's brought down from the Arizal and the Kabbalists, that there's tzaddikim that they take from people the zchuyot, essentially, that if a person does not merit their place in the things that they're earning, then other people take it, it's given to tzaddikim. But if the tzaddik is not a real tzaddik, he's not on the highest level, they take it and they don't return it to other people. But real tzaddikim, they take your losses. It's like clothing. There's many stories of garments of clothing that when a person passes away, the tzaddik re-gives you garments of clothing that when you pass away, because the body, even in this world, we require skin and we require a shelter and a covering to the neshama. In the spiritual worlds as well, there's coverings to the souls. There's other forms as well. But the tzaddikim, that are the real tzaddikim, they give garments and they give clothing over. That's why there's spiritual and physical references even in the upper realms, because it's paralleling the stuff that's happening in this world. So the tzaddik Emet re-gives you, when you come and you pray to him and you come pray by him at the kever, he re-gives you all the losses that you have. Because Rabbi Nachman says in the lesson, in 188 in book 1, he says, because I hold all the losses of all of Bnei Israel. Because Rabbi Nachman holds all of it. He says even to the point that he holds even the losses of all the goyim. So everybody needs to pass through the tzaddik to be able to regain all the things that they lost. So like we said, going back to the question, if you have all the losses that you don't know how to regain from the averot that you do, you don't know the tikkun that you need to do, you don't know how to be able to get closer to Hashem, you don't know how to have proper machshavot. So how do you do, where do you start in all of this journey? Comes Rabbi Nachman, lesson 6, in the lesson of Tshuva, first time he meets Rabbi Natan, he says, just like right now we're coming back in the Gilgulim of Yeshua and Moshe, he says, Ki tzarich adam lema'ed b'kvod atzmo, lower and reduce your kavod, ve'le'arbot et kvod hamakom. and increase the kavod of Hashem. That is how you begin to attach yourself to the tzaddik. First, to be able to begin to regain all the losses and to be able to bring back and to do tshuva, the first thing you need to do is the opening of lesson 6. That you need to be able to reduce yourself and you become humble and you become nothing. And when he saw that Rabbi Natan was mamash nothingness, that he became nothing, we saw from this that he learned that from there that he could become the true student of Rabbi Nachman, like Yeshua was to Moshe. That is just a little bit. We're going to eventually continue a little bit more on Likutei Moharan. I want to share a couple more stories of Rabbi Natan, but I think it's a good point to start, because if I start getting a little bit into the lesson, we might get a little bit lost. That was just to show you that behind the first sentence in the lesson of Likutei Moharan, there's a world which we didn't even go into the lessons that we had discussed, 88 of book 2 and 188 of book 1, that all these different types of things, we could have looked at the commentary on Likutei Halachot, on the section whenever Moshe is asked by Hashem to call Yeshua to the Ol Moed. There's a whole backstory here to not just being able to open up a book of Likutei Moharan and just be able to read a lesson. That just the word key, whenever you start off a lesson and it's giving an answer, there's a whole story behind here. There's a whole world of things that are existing here that we don't even understand. Rabbi Nachman of Tulshin, which was the father of Rav Avraham ben Nachman, like we said, he wrote down a lot of the teachings and the writings of Rabbi Natan. He helped him. And when he was writing and helping write Likutei Halachot, which was Rabbi Natan's masterwork, on all of the halachot, it's good laugh. Rabbi Nachman of Tulshin put in the very beginning of Likutei Halachot an amazing story. A story to show and give kavod and to give hakarat hatov to Rabbi Natan. And Rabbi Natan, when he finished Likutei Halachot at the end of his life, Rabbi Nachman had already passed away. And Rabbi Natan now had compiled all the teachings that he had and all the halachot and all the different teachings of Rabbi Nachman and put it together. He had prepared Likutei Tefillot, he had prepared so many different types of teachings of Rabbi Nachman and put it all together. And he says that he fell asleep one night, and there's a concept in Chassidut and in just general Torah that there's haskamot. There's people that write letters of praise in the beginnings of books to say, hey, this is a rabbi and I'm signing off that this rabbi is a great rabbi and he had a great book and I read his book and a lot of people should buy it and read it and learn it. So people that write haskamot. And in the Jewish community, in the religious community, both Hasidic and non-Hasidic, they all praise a lot of the haskamot. They all say like this is very important. But Rabbi Natan had a problem because Rabbi Nachman was not around and he wanted Rabbi Nachman to give the haskama to his book of Likutei Halachot. He wanted the approval of his Rav. So he didn't have a haskama. So when Rabbi Natan fell asleep at the end after he had finished printing and preparing all of Likutei Halachot, he had a dream and Rabbi Nachman comes to him with another person. And he's talking to him because he sees to him about the lesson. And the way Rabbi Yisrael Dov Odesser shares the story is he says that Rabbi Natan immediately, as he heard it down from generation to generation, because Rabbi Yisrael Dov Odesser was direct lineage of student, teacher from Rabbi Natan. It goes Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Natan, Rabbi Moshe Breslover, Rabbi Yisrael Karduner, and then Rabbi Yisrael Dov Odesser. And they had the secrets that were brought down from generation to generation amongst each other. And so Rabbi Yisrael Dov Odesser shares the story that comes obviously from the main student and the main partner of Rabbi Nachman, of Rabbi Natan, which is Rabbi Nachman of Tulshin. And he shares the story when Rabbi Natan told it to him. He says that when Rabbi Natan sees Rabbi Nachman in his dream, he starts running and crying and praying at his feet. And he tells him, I want to know if this is good what I did. And I want to know what you think of it. And Rabbi Nachman says to Rabbi Natan, says Zetov, says it's good. And behind him, there's a man that says Tov, Zetov Meod. And Rabbi Natan looks at his teacher and he looks at Rabbi Nachman and he says, who is that behind you? He says, you just received the haskama of Moshe Rabbeinu. So Rabbi Nachman of Tulshin put this in the beginning of Likutei Halachot. He says people need to read this in the very beginning. Rabbi Natan and Rabbi... I don't know how many... to be honest with you, I'm always a little weary of sharing too many stories and too many secrets about a lot of this stuff because I don't want to overload a lot of people. But Rabbi Natan, the reason why I'm doing it obviously because of Rabbi Natan's Hiloula, which was Asara B'Tevet, which was a couple days ago, and we celebrate the Hiloula 3 days before and 3 days after, as it says in the Zohar, that you can celebrate for the week of. But it's very important that people understand that while we will speak of Rabbi Nachman and we will always talk about Rabbi Natan, and like I said, the greatest kavod for Rabbi Natan would have been to only talk about Rabbi Nachman, we have to realize that the best kavod that we can share is to share how great all these tzaddikim were and how much they reduced themselves only to make sure that other people could study the books of their Rav. That's all they wanted. And so Bezrat Hashem, we will do that. Rabbi Natan, I'll share with you one last story. 2 more stories that are very quick, and then we'll end and we'll take some questions. Rabbi Natan was privy to a lot of very special things that happened with Rabbi Nachman, unlike any other people. Rabbi Natan was brought into the chambers of Rabbi Nachman one time, and Rabbi Nachman started telling him that he was going to start to write Sefer HaNisraf. Essentially, it became Sefer HaNisraf, which is the burnt book. It's a book within Breslov Chassidut, which we know have secrets that are... He said, Rabbi Nachman says that the Mashiach is going to be able to... I don't even know if he's going to be able to explain, Rabbi Nachman said. He said that he's going to be able to start to reveal secrets from Sefer HaNisraf, but he will not understand all of Sefer HaNisraf. He said of the Mashiach. He said, you will know that the Mashiach is the real Mashiach when he starts to reveal secrets of Sefer HaNisraf. There are people that try to translate Sefer HaNisraf into different languages. There are unfortunate, very, very sad stories about how those people passed away. People that try to write commentaries and try to write comments about Sefer HaNisraf, a lot of bad things happened to them. Very few people had the ability to be able to read the book and be able to share and reveal secrets that existed within the book. That's how elevated the level of this book is. Rabbi Natan, when he was revealed the teachings of Sefer HaNisraf, which they didn't really know as Sefer HaNisraf at the time because it was eventually burnt, the students that were outside the room waiting, because they knew Rabbi Nachman is revealing some insane level Torah right now and they didn't even know what he was going to be, they were waiting anxiously to see what was happening. When Rabbi Natan came out of the room, he said, I feel like I just stepped out of the out of the cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. When Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai shared the Idrot, which were the insane teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai at the end of his life, and obviously the main teachings, which you can see in also Parashat Naso, I believe, right? All the fantastic teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai when he shared the secrets, and they were sitting there in a circle. There's lots of amazing, amazing stories about how when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai used to share the stories, they would all sit in a circle and they would all share different types of interpretations of it, and how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was revealing the lessons that were being taught. He said, I feel like I just stepped out to the cave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai when he shared the stories to all the students. The last story I'm going to share with you about Rabbi Natan, and it's maybe one of the most important points we can take away from the class and what all of this is all about, is that when Rabbi Natan, towards the end of his life, when he passed away around the age of 65, he was in Breslov at the time, and Rabbi Naftali, his best friend, which is also a student of Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Naftali was one of the 2 witnesses for the Tikkun HaKlali. When Rabbi Nachman revealed the Tikkun HaKlali, he took Rabbi Aaron and Rabbi Naftali and he put them in front of the Sefer Torah and he made them swear and he made the promise that whoever comes onto my kever, whoever gives a tipa of tzedakah, gives a little bit of tzedakah, and does the Tikkun HaKlali on my kever, that he'll pull them from their peyot out of Gehenna. And he made the promise. When he did that promise, Rabbi Naftali was one of those people. And Rabbi Naftali and Rabbi Natan were best friends. They grew up together. They had the opportunity to learn from the Rav together. They shared stories together. And Rabbi Naftali was in Uman at the time when Rabbi Natan passed away in Breslov. Rabbi Natan passed away on Asara B'Tevet right before Shabbat, just like this year. Asara B'Tevet fell on Shabbat. It's very rare. But Bezrat Hashem, maybe it'll be a very special year this year. And when Rabbi Natan passed away, right before Shabbat, Rabbi Naftali had a dream that night. And he saw Rabbi Natan running. He said, oh, Rabbi Natan, where are you going? And he said, Ani ratz yashar leRabbeinu. And then he told his students, in Hebrew, Ani ratz yashar leRabbeinu means I'm running directly to Rabbi Nachman. And he turned over to his students, and he told all of them, Rabbi Naftali, and he said, everyone should know that Rabbi Natan passed away. Because people need to understand, and for me, I mean, this is like, when you learn a lot about Breslov Chassidut, there's a lot of things that are very subtle and very simple that we don't actually get the opportunity to be able to go into and delve into. And it's remarkable because there's so many big tzaddikim and we never share stories of tzaddikim, especially in Breslov Chassidut, because they don't want to give the kavod. Because we said when you give kavod, you're removing the concept of Hashem. Why? Because in lesson 6, which we haven't really delved into yet, is that to be able to have the kavod of Hashem, to have Hashem dwell within you and to have you work as an agent of Hashem and to experience all the Elokut, you have to be zero. So anytime a person accepts kavod, they're literally removing Hashem from their presence. And people don't know this, unfortunately. But Rabbi Natan, if you can imagine, since the age of 22, the love of his life was Rabbi Nachman. For 8 years straight, he just learned with Rabbi Nachman, learned with Rabbi Nachman, learned with Rabbi Nachman. He left his family. He was persecuted. He was put in jail. He was sought after. People tried to kill him. People used to throw rocks through his window of his house, almost killed one of the babies that was in his family. His wife came home with bruised face because of rocks that were being thrown at her. There are stories that are absolutely horrific. Rabbi Nachman was sought after, wanted. People tried to kill him. They put him in Cherem, all by religious Jews. They went to complain to the Russian Tsar at the time that they wanted to put him in jail. And these are people that are religious Jews. It's very important to understand that. These are people that were mitnagdim. They were completely against the Chassidut. And what? And Rabbi Natan, all he said was that I want to be next to my Rav and I want to reveal the teachings of the Rav. And I just want to make sure, after he passes away, if you think that there's someone after him, you missed the point completely. There is no one after him because he's still alive. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu. There's secrets about this that are written in the Zohar, that are in Parashat Re'eh. And towards the end of Dvarim, when Moshe passed away, he's giving you hints that as long as you open up my books, I will still be alive. Rabbi Nachman's the same thing. When we learn and we pick up the books of very, very big tzaddikim, they're still alive. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yochai, still alive. Darizal, still alive. They're up there praying for us. The Zohar says that if we think, the Zohar says that the only reason the world is still alive today is because tzaddikim up there are still praying for us and still working for us. Tzaddikim that passed away. It's written in the Zohar, black on white. So it's very simple for people to understand this. And the quicker that people understand this and we wipe our minds of ideas that we were taught that were not brought down by the holiest people, and the reason we start to learn the deeper teachings is the quicker we start to understand how to be able to get closer to Hashem. Rabbi Natan says, Ani ratz yashar leRabbeinu. He was with them for 8 years. And then at the age of 30, until 65, 35 years, his dream, only thing he wanted was to be able to be next to Rabbi Nachman again. It was his dream. It was all that he wanted. And finally, eventually, he reached the point where he was able to get next to Rabbi Nachman again. We should learn from Rabbi Natan that it's the opportunity that we have that we can be able to get close to a tzaddik, that it's okay sometimes to lower yourself, especially when it comes to a lesson like this that's very special, because in the lesson we're going to learn that when a person reduces their kavod, when a person gets embarrassed, it's the exact opposite of what we're taught. We're taught that people want to have honor. The Goyim teach us that the more honor, the better. The more people look at you, the better they honor. The better if you're standing in front of the room. The more money you have, the nicer your car is, the nicer this, the nicer that. It's the exact opposite. Breslovers would run away from kavod. The second they would call them Rav, what do you mean Rav? The Rav is over there. Rabbi Nachman is over there. I'm not a Rav. That's why in Breslov Chassidut, even people that are considered Rabbanim and we call them Rabbanim, if you call them Rav to their face, especially if you were even in Uman and if you were by the grave, they would smack you. They would literally smack you. It does not exist in Breslov Chassidut to have a Rav. There's only one Rav. There's Rabbi Nachman. And that's what's very special compared to other types of Chassidut. Never existed in history a Chassidut or a movement or a person that made sure that they would never take it upon themselves after that. It never existed. Every single people after that we have Talmid, and then we have Rav, and then we have Rav, and then we have Talmid, and then we have the same thing over and over again. Rabbi Natan said, no, you guys missed the point completely. There is no more after that. He prepared everything that we need until the Mashiach. Ha'esheli tukadad vet Mashiach. Rabbi Nachman said. And so, Bezrat Hashem, through the teachings that we will learn in this book, and as we will start to learn in depth, we will, Bezrat Hashem, have the opportunity to work on ourselves, attach ourselves to tzaddikim, attach ourselves to the tzaddik I met, and have the ability to be able to grow in Torah and mitzvot, and to be able to achieve our tikkunim and bring the glory of Hashem into this world and help bring the Mashiach. Amen. Ken Yeh Ratzon. We'll open it up to questions for a little bit, and you can keep it on if you want, and we'll take some questions on video. If not, we'll take it off. So if anyone has any questions directly, we can chat right now. If not, we can talk to people privately after, whatever it is.
Why so much suffering?
Why so much suffering?
Why do you have to go through so much suffering? Those kids, those wives.
Unfortunately, suffering is one of the biggest secrets that exist in essentially Hashem's plan. We don't understand this, but everybody suffers. Everybody suffers in varying degrees. And when Rabbi Natan came in the dream to Rabbi Nachman, where Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Haskama, he told Rabbi Nachman, for years he was doing Hibodedut and he was praying. And if you look at his Likutei Tefillot, if you read Likutei Tefillot and you read the things that Rabbi Natan shares and the way he makes himself like nothing, the stories of the suffering. I mean, there's other tzaddikim that suffered, of course, and there's people today that suffer incredibly. There isn't much that I could say because I don't know the hand of God, but what I can say is that suffering, according to the Kabbalah, is one of the highest elevations of how a person can elevate their soul. There's stories of the Baal Shem Tov that can elucidate the points. There's stories and there's concepts that we unfortunately suffer sometimes in this world, not necessarily because of things that we've done. Sometimes we're suffering because we're repairing something of a previous gilgul. There's a lot of different examples to that. But that's why every night before we go to bed, when we do the Kriyat Shema Lamita, which is actually a very interesting idea and it's a very interesting topic, maybe we'll do a class on it one day. We say to Hashem, before we give our neshama back to Hashem and we return it, we talk to Hashem and we say, for all the sins that we've done and all the things that we've done wrong, whether we did it in this gilgul or we did it in a previous gilgul, we say it. It's the same reason why we also, whenever we do Chatati, Aviti, Pashati, whenever we do the Tachanun, whenever we do prayers in the day, we're praying and we're helping and we're rectifying and we're coming back into this world, not for reasons that we are experiencing right now. We have been here and we have coming back and we're doing things that we've been doing for many, many years. We've been doing it for thousands of years. Other than very, very, very few select neshamot, we are all gilgulim. And most people, you can say with absolute certainty, are all gilgulim. The only next new neshama that's brand new, that's going to exist, is going to be the Mashiach. There is no new neshamot with almost 99.9 infinite certainty, except for the Mashiach. Rabbi Natan was an exception to that. Rabbi Nachman was obviously a new neshama. Rabbi Nachman came out of the body of Adam, according to the Kabbalah, before he sinned. So before Adam ate from the tree, 5 neshamot left Adam, and that's a lesson within itself, but Rabbi Nachman is one of those neshamot. Because he's completely pure and he didn't taint himself and he didn't come from the sea, from the tree of Da'at, he has the ability to be able to rectify. Unlike many other people that cannot. There's few neshamot that come from that level. The Arizal is one of those neshamot, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is one of those neshamot, Moshe Rabbeinu is one of those neshamot, the Baal Shem Tov is one of those neshamot. Very few people came out and said that they were one of those neshamot. That is referenced in the books of the Arizal. But suffering, to answer the question more specifically, we will never know the reason for it, the details, the little movements of the pawns on the chessboard, but we will understand, and what we need to have emunah is that there's a big picture at hand, and that we need to pray to Hashem, that Hashem is giving us the opportunity to be able to accept everything that happens, and we see only good, and that we accept it with baracha, and Hashem helps us with ease, and that when we connect to the tzaddikim, we have a path that allows us to be directed through that suffering. And that it doesn't change, and it kind of pivots from suffering into something that becomes more meaningful, so that we don't fall victim to the suffering. There's a very famous quote, while someone else maybe is thinking of a question, that Viktor Frankl writes in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. It's a book of a man that went through the Holocaust. It's a great book. And Viktor Frankl writes that suffering ceases to become suffering when you have meaning. And if you think about it, it's actually true. Because if you go to the gym and you're working out and it's tough and it's annoying, the gym sucks. But the second that it becomes meaningful, as in you're working out because you want to be healthier, you want to have a better body, or you want to do it to become healthier, to fix your blood pressure, whatever it is, you have meaning attached, and your suffering is no longer suffering, it has purpose. Part of our life is moving from suffering to purpose. And that's why a lot of the time when we see things very darkly is because we don't see the meaning behind things. We don't see the purpose behind things. And what we have to do is we have to continue to work to gain more vision and more insight of Hashem, and to do that we need to reduce ourselves and find Hashem by reducing our kavod And when you do that, Hashem reveals to you meaning. And He reveals to you how sometimes the suffering exists and how you need to pass through it. But unfortunately, there is suffering that exists, and unfortunately, we need to pass through it. And it's part of Hashem's mission and part of what we do in this world, but we don't understand all of it. In reality, it's all good. We use the word suffering, but understand that it's all good. Understand that it helps rectify neshamot. Is there any other questions? There's never questions whenever we do these conversations. It's so funny. All right, we can cut it for now. We can